we're doing our study and our sermons on knowing God. And it's important. Why? Because how many are familiar with the term relativism? All right. How many of us have gone to bed with relativism and not realize it? Well, first off, what is relativism? It's the idea that my truth may not be that person's truth or that person's truth or that person's truth. And I'm sure you heard that. I believe this, and that's fine that you believe that. But it seems to be forgetting something. There's only one creator, right? There's only one creator. And when we see this, even in Christendom, we have to ask ourselves, did we go to bed with relativism? Because you know how difficult it is to divorce ourselves, our thinking, in the culture, in the time period in which we live. I mean, I think of the scholastics and how the culture in which they lived moved them from biblical Christianity to this philosophical ideas that man became the center of things, and they decided what's truth and twisted and turned, but we're still doing that. There's a Latin phrase that goes, principium ascendi. Now, before you think I'm a scholar because I quoted Latin, I got to share something with you. When I was in school, my first year in high school, we had to take Latin. And we had a saying. We used to say, Latin is rolling in the dust. It first killed the Romans, now it's killing us. So, but it's a big term, but it simply means the first and essential element of knowledge is to know God. First and foremost is to know Him. That's why when we look at the Isaiah text, which we will go through the whole context, but I want to key in on Isaiah 55, where he talks to us and he says in verse 8, my thoughts are not your thoughts. Now, how many of us are aware of God and aware of Him in our conscience, yet due to our unbelief or unknowing who He is, never seek to go beyond what we naturally conceive of God? Think about it. We have a natural conception of God that sometimes we bring to the book. We have a natural conception of God that fits in with everybody else. But do we come to the Word of God and say, Lord, I want to know you as you reveal yourself through your written word, through your incarnate word, Jesus Christ. He says, oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the person who takes refuge in Him. But see, for most of us, we settle for knowing God maybe through an emotional sentiment of staring at a couple of cumulus clouds and the setting and rising of the sun. Now, there is a way, there is a means that God has showed us. Romans 1, 19 to 20. For what can be known about God is plain to everyone, because God has shown it to them. How? He has shown us His invisible attributes, namely His eternal power, His divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world by the very things He made. So when we go out and we see these things, we can see His invisible attributes. But it's the visible characteristics that He put in print for us that I want us to see. And to get to know Him, His character, and His works of providence, which we cannot get from creation alone. We need special revelation. See, we can know that God is powerful because someone who is not infinitely powerful, right, could not bring something out of nothing. But the danger of not knowing Him, from as He reveals Himself, tends to create in our own minds a deity that thinks and looks like us. And this is what we want to guard against. Let's look at Isaiah 55, 8 and 9. Now there's three words in there. There's the word thoughts, there's the word ways, and there's also the word declare. The word thoughts, it gives us the idea of a texture of machine, a thought made for a particular purpose. It's the device, it's the plan, it's the purpose, and it means the intention. So you track it, right? When you look at the word thought, it's what is devised, what is planned, what is purposed, what's intended. Then you got the word ways. It's a direction of the course, a journey. It's a direction of the course. And then we see this word declare. It's an utterance, it's a declaration, it's a decree, it's a statement. The statement is coming from God. So now as we look at the text, he says, "For my thoughts, my purpose, my plan, my intention are not your purpose, your plan, your intention." You see that? Because how easy is it that we fall into this pattern of saying, why would God do something like that? Are we more righteous than God? I mean, think of clay and dust saying, why did you do this? And the only way you're going to be able to put your hand and say, why did you do this? How did this happen? Is you don't know God. You don't know him. Because if you knew him, you would fall down as though dead. And I always say it's amazing how this dust ball, this clay, could have that audacity to question God on his providence and on his dealings with us. So he says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, my thoughts." So we can't get to those thoughts. We can't understand how my thoughts are not your thoughts. My ways are not your ways. That shows a clear distinction between the creature and the creator. God's thoughts cannot be and are not our thoughts. Human thinking about God will never comprehend God's thoughts. The reason being, as creatures, our thinking is dependent thinking. Think about that. As creatures, we have dependent thinking. Now, what do I mean by dependent thinking? First and foremost, we must learn in order to think. We have to learn in order to think. I had to be taught a word when I was a baby. And I see this little book that all of us had at one time in our life when we had our first baby pictures. And according to my mother, she said my first word was Louie. Now, how did I pick up the first word Louie unless I learned somebody calling my father, "Hey, Louie"? So I had to learn, right? Our knowing is limited. How? To what we have learned. If we didn't learn it, guess what? We don't know it. All human knowledge is derivative. Something that is based on another source. Our thinking is lower than God's thinking. How is that? God is eternal and self-existent. We're finite and dependent. But that does not stop us from thinking we may know better. But when we think that, we don't know him. Another point, we need to be counseled. God does not need any to counsel him. In Isaiah, turn to Isaiah chapter 40, verses 12 to 14. God says, "Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand and marked off the heavens with a span, and closed the dust of the earth in a measure, and weighed the mountains in the scales and the hills in a balance?" No one. No one. Who has measured the Spirit of the Lord? Or what man shows him counsel? Whom did he consult? And who made him understand? Who taught him the path of justice and taught him knowledge and showed him the way of understanding? No one. No one. God doesn't have to hire an architect to build something, because God's knowledge is what? It's exhaustive compared to ours. John Owen said, theology was not to be the exercise of the human mind controlling biblical facts. Rather, it consisted of the human mind submitting itself to the divine influence exerted upon it from his written word. See, folks, when we come to the scriptures, we don't hold them down here and become what I want to believe or what I don't want to believe. We don't play with the Almighty, right? In 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 11. 1 Corinthians 2:11. For who among the people knows the thoughts of a person except the spirit of the person that is in him? Think about that. How many of us could be in a room, we're sitting all by our lonesome, or you see somebody over there standing, you don't know the person, you know what they're thinking? It's all guesswork, right? Should we even go that way? No. But who among the people knows the thoughts of a person except the spirit of the person that is in him? The only person that knows what they're thinking is that person. So also, the thoughts of God, no one knows except the Spirit of God. Now notice Paul uses we, the plural pronoun. We have not received the spirit of the world. Now we want to stop for a minute there. Think about the spirit of the world. We're born in an era of pluralism and relativism. Have we slept with them? Pluralism, everybody's right. Relativism, everybody's right. Ultimately, that's the scheme of what they want you to believe. But there's a people difference. And the difference is, we have not received the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who's from God, so that we may know the things freely given to us by God. He says in verse 13, we also speak these things, not in words taught by human wisdom, but in those taught by the Spirit, combining spiritual thoughts with spiritual words. Look at verse 14. But a natural person does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolish to him. Now consider that. When you come across something, I don't believe in a God who acts that way. I don't believe in a God who is this way. What are you rejecting from his word? What are you carving out of that word? And why are you doing that? We should be submitting to him, right? But the one who is spiritual discerns all things, yet he himself is discerned by no one. For who has known the mind of the Lord, that he will instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ. See, folks, we need the mind of Christ to understand. No one can get to who? The Father, except through Christ. Who reveals the Father to us? The Son. We could read the scriptures, as many throughout the centuries have read them, and not know him. But maybe it's because we haven't come to Christ first. These are things we have to consider, because we want to see, am I caught up in the spirit of this age? Because remember, grace takes us out of the spirit of the age, out of the course of this world, and puts us in his kingdom. God's knowledge is exhaustive. Ours is limited. Ours has to grow. I know more than I did when I was in nursery school. I know more than I did when I was in 8th grade, right? We could all say that. I know more than I did when I left high school, you see? And we will not stop learning until we go home to glory. With God, it's different. See, God knows everything about everything. His knowledge is absolutely comprehensive. Nothing in God's knowledge is divided into parts. He knows this part, but not that. Nothing. He knows the whole. What do I mean by the whole? Every possibility, every scenario, every and any outcome, he knows the end from the beginning. So we could rest assured, after it made history, it was ordained by God to take place. God's knowledge does not grow or develop like the world, because God as our creator is transcendent and independent from what he has made. God is transcendent. What do we mean? That he is separate from his creation and not dependent on the created order in any way. But he's also immanent. In Acts chapter 17, 24 to 25, the God who made the world and everything in it, think about that, being Lord of heaven and earth. You know what that word Lord? Master, owner. He's Lord of heaven and earth. He does not live in temples made by man. Notice verse 25. Nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life, breath, and everything. Doesn't that shatter some pride? Nor is he served by human hands. I'm nothing. This would be if it wasn't me. In Psalm 75:3, when the earth totters and all its inhabitants, God says, it is I who keep steady its pillars. Metaphorically, he upholds the universe by the power of his word, and in him all things consist. Is our God this God? When humanity turns God into an idol, the resemblance is always what? Into our image. The God of the world thinks and acts like a human. Since mortal flesh carved him from their own mindset, they recreate him to agree with themselves and their own personal beliefs. That's how relativism gets. Well, I don't believe God controls anything like you say he does. Did I say it or did the book say it, right? We want to ask that first of all. Now, if he says it and we reject it, are we not recreating a God to our own liking that suits my understanding of what I want to believe in? See, the pantheistic worldview claims God is in his creation, the tree, the tulips, the various things. Process theists deny that God knows actual future events. It's in Christendom today. You don't hear the term process theists, but they're all over the place in all the churches. He doesn't know what's going to happen. Oh, what do you mean he doesn't know what's going to happen? That's what they believe. That's what they believe. That he doesn't know future events because the future is not yet knowable. That's their argument. Well, according to who is it not yet knowable? I don't know what's going to happen at 6 o'clock. Do you? And we've learned through life, death knows no age. We learned that a circumstance could come and change us forever. We don't know what's ahead. We make that false assumption that we went over in the book of James, remember? I'll see you next week. No, Lord willing, I'll see you next week. But when they come up with this process theism, you see what they're doing? They're creating God after their philosophy. Then that teacher comes and he schmoozes you, wines you and dines you to believe what he's saying. You never believe, you believe what's here. It's got to come from here. The way to avoid wrong views of God is to turn to his where? His revealed word. Keep everything in its context. The immediate context and the broader context. Isaiah is not going to contradict John. Moses is not going to contradict Christ. You see? So when we come to God, do we realize some of these things? My thoughts are not your thoughts. My ways are not your ways. Well, one of the ways God is different from us is he sees. What does he see? Because you and I could see each other. Now, I could have saw you all better 25 years ago. Now, thanks to modern technology, I can see you all pretty good. But God sees. Let's look at how he sees. In Genesis 16:13, Hagar recognized this. She called the name of the Lord who spoke to her. You are a God of seeing. For she said, truly here I have seen him who looks after me. El Roy. Hagar, not part of the covenant promise, but God took care of her. She saw the God who sees her. In Genesis chapter 1, 7 times God saw what he made. He saw what he made, and he declared it was good. Pre-fall. Pre-fall. That's when hurricanes and tornadoes and earthquakes, that did occur. Genesis 6:5. The Lord saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Folks, could we infallibly know our hearts in us? We have to say, Lord, search me and know me, because I don't even know myself. But we tend to find out more about ourselves when a situation comes about. We see our reaction, then we say, I can't believe I said that or did that or whatever. Psalm 33. The Lord looks down from heaven. He sees all the children of humanity. Imagine that. He sees all the children of humanity. From where he sits enthroned, he looks out on all the inhabitants of the earth. Do we realize that? Because when we're out to do no good, we think he doesn't see. Then it has to come back. Do I believe in the God who reveals himself? Job said, for he looks to the ends of the earth. He sees everything under the heavens. Hebrews 4:13, no creature is hidden from his sight, but all of us are naked and exposed to the eyes of him to whom we must give an account. See, God knows the reality of every person and exhaustively about us without any limitation. We don't even know ourselves. So do we believe in the God who reveals himself? Now you notice I went through a bunch of scripture verses. How is it, folks, right, that all these who've encountered the living and true God all have the same understanding of who God is? And then lo and behold, in 2023, I don't believe in a God like that. What's wrong with that picture? See, God not only sees, but he knows all things. Why? Because he's present in his creation. Psalm 139, 5 and 7. You hemmed me in. Who hemmed me in? He hemmed me in. Behind me and before me. And lay your hand upon me. I used to play this game as a kid. I didn't know God though. But I used to play this game. I used to walk, right? I would take a step and I would look up and say, did you know I was going to take that step? I had no idea what I was doing though. But I remember this game because I always played it. I would go like this and then make a quick move and say, did you see that? These inquisitive things that I remembered, and that's going way back when I was under 100 pounds. But then when you come to the fact, you say, he hems me in from behind and in front of me. Now, what's our reaction? Do we say, I don't like that idea? Wait a minute, you're telling me that he's laid out the perimeters of my life? You mean everything I have gone through, he ordained it to come through? I mean, what kind of God does that? Or what's the more biblical response? Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It's high, I cannot attain it. Think about it. Such knowledge of a being that knows every possible circumstance, and the only way we know is after the fact. And when we do know, sometimes those hurt us, right? They bother us. Why did this happen? So who do you go to for wisdom? You go back to him. What did he say? If any of you lack wisdom, ask him. He's going to give it to you abundantly, and he's not going to chastise you for asking him. God is present in every situation. Where shall I go from your spirit, or where shall I flee from your presence? Folks, when we decide to change who God is, he becomes more favorable to who we are. Why? Because now he's created in our image. And the age of relativism will do this. You could carve out your deity, you could carve out yours, you could carve out yours, you could hide it in the church. You could sing the same songs, say the same prayers, but we have a view of God that differs, and we just say, well, we could disagree to agree. Or it's like how many of us ever saw the picture of they blindfold this person, and they have to touch an animal, and they have to figure out what it is. And they all come up with, well, they were blindfolded. They were blindfolded. And we are blind also until what? He opens up our eyes. So the application for this evening's service is Jesus said that we're to know him. Eternal life hinges on knowing him and Jesus Christ. The Apostle Peter says, grow in the grace, grow in the knowledge of him. God reveals himself in his word so that what? We may grow and know him. Get into the word. When you start off in Genesis, don't just read it for the sake of reading it. Read it to know him. You know, it reminds me of an old Civil War man who wrote a letter to his wife, and the wife said the only letter she ever got from, because he never came home. But she said she would cherish this letter and read it and read it and read it. She knew what he was going through. She knew the trials, the devastation, the debts that he was seeing. Everything was in there. But how did she do that? She kept reading it and discerning what it said. When we get to Genesis 1 and we see that God created things one day, the next day, the next day, that's God. Sit back and say, you are God. You created. When you see the verses, he hemmed me in. He placed me in my neighborhood. He gave me a time to be born, a time to die. All these things. Respond. Such knowledge is too high for me. But go back to him. Seek him in his word. Seek him through Jesus Christ. And remember, we're living in an age of idolatry rampant, and it's clothed in liturgical clothes and liturgical songs and incense. Don't buy the building. Don't buy the name. Everybody uses the name. You got to get into the identity. Who is God? And you're going to be shocked when you take a survey and you ask people, and I did it in North Carolina, I did it in Kansas, I did it in Clarksville. I asked simple questions at every age I could run across. Who's God? You'd be amazed at what you hear. And then I would say, where do you go? I'm a Baptist, I'm a Methodist, I'm a Presbyterian. God forbid in a Presbyterian church, you're supposed to be theologians. No, but you know, why? Get back to the word, amen?